Alright, so we're going to start our lecture series here on Friedrich Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy. In this first video, I'm just going to introduce us to the concept of the Dionysian and the Apollonian in Nietzsche, and hopefully it'll be not too long of a video. I guess I should mention at the outset that this is Nietzsche's first published work, and he later in his life pretty much dismissed it, right? He was pretty embarrassed by it. He wrote an introduction to a new edition that came out, I think, in 1886 or 7 or something, and pretty much all but disowned it. But there are, you'll see, I think as we get to later lectures, I think there are definitely some distinctive concepts, thoughts, ideas, tropes, if you will, that do carry on, I think, into Nietzsche's later work. And so I'll bring that out. This is, a pretty influential essay in the philosophy of art. I'm wondering what Nietzsche would think about that. That would probably be much to his chagrin, perhaps. But who knows? There's a lot of Schopenhauer in here, too. So if you're not familiar with Schopenhauer, you might first, if you're not one of my students watching this, right? If you haven't already, watch the Schopenhauer videos, become familiar at least a little bit with Schopenhauer's metaphysics. And then I think you'll understand a little bit of some of the claims that Nietzsche's making here, because in this early work, he's still deeply influenced by the philosophy of Schopenhauer, and also a friend of his, the German composer Richard Wagner. So anyway, so keep that in mind as we go through this, right? Schopenhauer is always in the background. Okay, so like I said, this video we're focusing on the concept of the Apollonian and the Dionysian in Nietzsche's essay, The Birth of Tragedy. We're not going to have time to go over the entire essay. We're only going to go over the first 15 sections that are in this textbook, right? Philosophies of Art, our textbook for our class. So let's just dive right in. This short quote here, Nietzsche makes this claim that the development of art, the continuous development of art, is bound up with the Apollonian and the Dionysian duality. Just as procreation depends on the duality of the sexes, involving perpetual strife with only periodically intervening reconciliations. Okay, so I have here this painting of the Greek gods, Apollo and Dionysus. We're going to find out a little bit more about them as we progress through this lecture and throughout the entire essay that are going to be coming up. But Nietzsche claims that, right here at the outset, that this duality, right, this Apollonian Dionysian duality, is sort of what explains development, the continuous development of art. So what is he talking about, right? That's, again, the focus of this video, right? He compares it to the procreation of the sexes, right? The male and the female. Of course, he's working with a sort of a 19th century conception of gender roles, right? So keep that in mind. Involving the perpetual strife with only periodically intervening reconciliations. That's Schopenhauer talking through Nietzsche, right? Perpetual strife. Of course, this is something I think, again, he does maintain in his later philosophy. Nietzsche does, right? This notion of strife, the universe being this chaotic. This is not even Schopenhauer. You can even go back to Heraclitus for this, right? That strife and tension is just an inherent property of the cosmos. And there's only these intervening short reconciliations, right? These brief reconciliations, right? Sounds like Heraclitus, sounds like a Buddhist, sounds like Schopenhauer. So in order to grasp these two tendencies, let us first conceive of them as separate art worlds of dreams and drunkenness. These physiological phenomena present a contrast analogous to that existing between the Apollonian and the Dionysian, right? So he's going to draw an analogy from our own experience. We've all had dreams, we've all been asleep and had dreams in the night, or even dreams in a broader sense, right? Fantasies about what we would like our life to be like, right? You could even think of dreams, I think, even in this context, analogous to the Apollonian in that sense, perhaps. Depends on the dream. And then unless you've never had alcohol in your life, you've never been drunk, then you probably don't know what he's talking about, right? You might think you do because you've seen movies where people were drunk, but it's something you have to, you know. I'm not recommending this, right? I'm not saying you have to get drunk, right? No, don't put words in my mouth. But he's drawing from human experience, and he says we've all had these experiences, and this is the Apollonian element in dreams and the drunken Dionysian element, right? So how is the Apollonian element in art and in our human experience akin to our experience of the dream? So here's what Nietzsche says. The beautiful appearance of the dream worlds, in creating which every man is a perfect artist, is the prerequisite of all plastic art. That's quite a bold claim he's making, right? So dreams, our ability to dream, these images we have in our sleep, is the prerequisite for all plastic art, right? For all painting, sculpture, etc. In our dreams, we delight in the immediate apprehension of form. All forms speak to us, not a Platonic form, right? Don't get confused here. Just form as is generally understood, right? Shapes and colors. So in our dreams, we delight in the immediate apprehension of form. All forms speak to us. None are unimportant. None are superfluous. But when this dream reality is most intense, we also have glimmering through it the sensation of its appearance. Indeed, the man of philosophic mind has a presentiment that underneath this reality in which we live and have our being is concealed another quite different reality, and which, like the first, is an appearance. Okay, this is that last part against Schopenhauer, right? The world is my will and representation, right? What we see is a representation of what underlies reality, and what underlies reality is will for Schopenhauer, okay? So he still has a hold on Nietzsche's thought deeply here. But let's look at what he says about dreams here. Let's pause for a minute. So the beautiful appearance of dream worlds, in creating which every man's a perfect artist. We don't have to try to dream. We're asleep. It just happens, right? We're all a perfect artist. And this is what leads to the creation of the plastic arts, right? Our ability to dream is what makes us capable of also painting and sculpting and things. Why? Well, in dreams we delight of this immediate apprehension of form. We just, we lay back, we enjoy the show. And none are superfluous. And this, I don't know, you maybe argue against. You could. I'm not a psychoanalyst, and I know a lot of people don't take psychoanalysis serious anyway. But in our waking life, you might say that there are all sorts of details that are superfluous, right? Like, if I'm walking down the street, does it matter to me how many pebbles are on the street, right? Or how rough the gravel is, or all these little minute details? It might, I guess, depending on the context. I'd have to think about a context where those things would matter. Maybe if I was the construction worker, right? But we're surrounded by details that don't really have much significance to us. Unlike the dream, where everything is fully symbolically, it's all full of meaning and significance, right? There's nothing superfluous in a dream. And so when it's most intense, we have brimming through the sensation of its appearance. Indeed, the man of the philosophic mind, he's aware that even our waking life, in a certain sense, is like a dream. Again, he's coming from a Schopenhauerian perspective. All we see is a representation of what actually really is. And so that's what we say at the end here. What else? This joyful necessity. I'm going to turn this off real quick. This joyful necessity of the dream experience has been embodied by the Greeks in their Apollo. Okay, so when we see this figure of Apollo, the Greek god, right, the guy with his chariot that pulls the sun around the earth, this is the Greeks sort of embodying this dream capacity in humans in a deity. So the joyful necessity of the dream experience has been embodied by the Greeks in their Apollo. For Apollo, the god of all plastic energies, and the word plastic here, you're probably thinking of the synthetic material that was developed in the early part of the 20th century. He's writing this in the 1800s. I don't know, maybe plastic's older than that. It might be, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But plastic was not a thing. When you say plastic, it's malleable, able to take on different forms and changeable, right? He's the god of, I guess, forging form, right? The god of all plastic energies. And is at the same time the soothsaying god. He's associated with soothsaying, right? With predicting the future and prophecy. He who, as the etymology of the name indicates, is the shining one, right? He's associated with light, the sun, deity of light. He's also the ruler over fair appearance of the inner world of fantasy, the higher truth, the perfection of these states, in contrast to the incompletely intelligible everyday world. This deep consciousness of nature, healing and helping in sleep and dreams, is at the same time the symbolic analog of the soothsaying faculty and of the arts generally, which make life possible and worth living. This is a famous quote of Nietzsche's, right? Art makes life worth living is usually how it's quoted. And really that kind of is not a fair, that's kind of an out of context quote. It's a cool quote, but it's not exactly what it kind of takes a little bit of the point away. He's talking in the context of the Apollonian element in art. And so he says that, again, Apollo makes the formal arts, the plastic arts possible. He's associated with sculpting and painting and things like this, and which the sculpture is a completely significant object and nothing's extraneous to it, much like a dream, okay? The painting as well, right? It is self-contained, at least 1800s, 19th century painting, right? The higher truth, the perfection of these states, in contrast to the incompletely intelligible everyday world, this deep consciousness of nature, healing and helping in sleep and dreams, is at the same time the symbolical analog. It's a symbol that's analogous to the soothsaying faculty, right? The ability to predict the future, events, and people's fortune telling, right? And the arts generally. Okay, so it gives birth. It's that capacity, and it's the Apollonian element in our nature that. As I keep butchering this point in the ground, so I'll move on. Just give me a second. It makes us able to create arts, plastic arts, and because of that, it makes life possible and worth living. We're going to get more into that. How does art make life worth living? How does art make life possible? This is going to be very important when we get to tragedy. So I think I'm going to kind of save it for that. But he's dropping little seeds here, right? How does art make life worth living? He later on he's going to say that life can only be justified as aesthetic experience. So maybe we'll wait till we get to that passage before I elaborate too much. So we're about to move on to the Dionysian, but let's finish off the Apollonian real quick. We also have to include in our picture of Apollo that delicate boundary, which the dream picture must not overstep, lest it act pathologically, in which case appearance would impose upon us as pure reality. We must keep in mind that measured restraint, that freedom from the wilder emotions, that philosophical calm of the sculptor god. His eye must be sun-like, as befits his origin. Even when his glance is angry and distempered, the sacredness of his beautiful appearance must still be there. So he sets boundaries, okay? He gives form, right? He's a boundary-setting god, and that way he's measured, he shows restraint. There's a sort of harshness and sternness about Apollo, right, the god. But there's also a sort of calmness and a repose and a sort of sweetness. This when we're at our most organized and things just sort of fall into place in our life, right? That is an experience of the Apollonian. Okay, now in contrast to this, right, you've got the Dionysian element that it shows itself in works of art. Where's the origin of this? He thinks it's brought home to us most intimately by the analogy of drunkenness, right? The famous Caravaggio painting, right, of Dionysus, or Bacchus, as he's also known. Nietzsche writes, if under the influence of the narcotic drought we hear of in the songs of all primitive men, or which we hear of in all the songs of primitive men and peoples, or with the potent coming of spring penetrating all nature with joy, that these Dionysian emotions awake, which as they intensify cause the subjective to vanish into complete self-forgetfulness. This sounds a bit, again, like Schopenhauer, the willless subject, right, who loses a sense of self, loses a sense of their own subjectivity, and just becomes all sort of merged in one. This, I think, though, is to be fair to Nietzsche, a bit different. I think he's saying something a little bit different than Schopenhauer is, right? For him, the Dionysian, I think, is a little bit more ecstatic. It's a little bit more, sensual than I think Schopenhauer would allow. It's not as ascetic or for Schopenhauer, the artistic experience is much like the experience of a monk in a monastery, right? But not so for Nietzsche, right? This sort of subjectless experience, when we let go of ourselves, right? The destruction of the principle of individuation, the principium individualis, right? This is a little bit more, I think, sexy or hedonistic than Schopenhauer would allow for. Okay, so I think this is a little bit new. This is something different from Nietzsche. Under the charm of the Dionysian, not only is the union between man and man reaffirmed, right? We become one with our brothers, right? There's no, as opposed to the Apollo where the boundaries are set. So under the charm of the Dionysian, not only is the union between man and man reaffirmed, but nature, which has become estranged, hostile, or subjected, right, or subjugated, celebrates once more her reconciliation with her prodigal son, man. Freely earth proffers her gifts, and peacefully the beasts of prey approach from desert and mountain. So not only do we feel at one with our fellow man, we feel at one with nature, with the animals, with the plants, right? It's kind of sounding hippie, right? Hippy-dippy, right? The chariot of Dionysus is bedecked with flowers and garlands. Panthers and tigers pass beneath his yoke. Transform Beethoven's Hymn to Joy into a painting. Let your imagination conceive of the multitudes bowing to the dust, awestruck. Then you will be able to appreciate the Dionysian. Now the slave is free. Now all the stubborn, hostile barriers, which necessity, caprice, or shameless fashion have erected between man and man, are broken down. Now with the gospel of universal harmony, each one feels himself not only united, reconciled, blended with his neighbor, but as one with him. All right, so again, the Apollo is establishing of boundaries and order, and the Dionysian as this return to a kind of primal oneness. And where do we see this in art? Not so much in painting and sculpture, but for Nietzsche, more so in music. In song and dance, man expresses himself as a member of a higher community. He has forgotten how to walk and speak. He is about to take dancing. He's about to take a dancing flight into the air. His very gestures bespeak enchantment. Just as the animals now talk, just as the earth yields milk and honey, so from him emanate supernatural sounds. He feels himself a god. He himself now walks about enchanted, in ecstasy, like the gods whom he saw walking about in his dreams. He's no longer an artist. He's become a work of art. In these paroxysms of intoxication, the artistic power of all nature reveals itself to the highest gratification of the primordial unity. Right, primordial unity, again, more Schopenhauer there, right? We've got the will that underlies everything, this one sort of chaotic striving towards completion, which never gets quite complete, right? This metaphysical force that underlies the universe. The Dionysian brings us into contact with that oneness, right? It removes all these barriers, right? And it makes us sort of become one with nature, right? And this is, again, expressed by human beings through music, right? Particularly instrumental music, right? When we get to words and song, it gets a little bit different, right? Maybe even acting, right? We talked a little bit, if you're one of my students from U of H, and you were there for the Plato lecture, where we went over Ion, and he talks about, the Homeric bard who when he's really in the middle of his song and reciting the legend, when he's doing his best, he forgets himself. He loses himself, right? He doesn't create art. He is the work of art, right? Whereas the Apollonian artist creates a work that is stable and permanent and is not sort of something that is a momentary flash of intoxication and oneness. So how does all this fit together, and how does this have anything to do with tragedy, right? The title of Nietzsche's essay is The Birth of Tragedy. He's going to claim, right, that these two forces, right, these two elements in humans, in the universe, right, in all art, they have sort of their hand on it all at least the development of art. You might not find Dionysian and Apollonian elements in every work of art, but the way that art develops is it seems like Nietzsche's thesis here is art develops as a reaction to these two very distinct and seemingly oppositional, but yet complementary forces, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. So again, how does this fit into tragedy? With reference to these immediate art states of nature, every artist is an imitator. That is to say, either an Apollonian artist in dreams or a Dionysian artist in ecstasies. Or finally, as in Greek tragedy, at once an artist in both dreams and ecstasies. Right? So in the Greek tragedy, we get a blending of both these elements in art. So we may perhaps picture him sinking down in his Dionysian drunkenness and mystical self-abnegation, alone and apart from the singing revelers. And we may imagine how now, through Apollonian dream inspiration, his own state, in other words, his oneness with the primal nature of the universe, is revealed to him in a symbolic dream picture, right? So through these two forces, we can have a direct access to this primordial oneness, right? Through a symbolic dream picture, okay, or through this sort of drunken, mystical self-abnegation that is the Dionysian. These two antagonistic forces, right, they were reconciled. The boundary lines thenceforth to be observed by each were sharply defined, and there was to be a periodical exchange of gifts of esteem. So they each had their role to play in Greek tragedy, but it was a nice balance. It worked. But if we may observe how under the pressure of this treaty of peace, the Dionysian power revealed itself, we shall now recognize in the Dionysian orgies of the Greeks the significance of the festivals of world redemption and days of transfiguration. It is with them that nature for the first time attains her artistic jubilee. It is with them that the destruction of the principle of individuation for the first time becomes an artistic phenomenon. So he's giving a lot of credit, I think, to Greek tragedy. He thinks it's the first art form that brings together these two forces in a way that's balanced, where each one serves its purpose and function, and they don't overstep each other's lines. And what this brings about is an artistic phenomenon, right? And this is, I think, what is I think is interesting about Nietzsche and different from Schopenhauer. I'm sure Schopenhauer could have gotten this maybe out of his philosophy, but he never drew this out of it. Nietzsche is pointing to a parallel between an artistic phenomenon and the culture from which it springs, right? It's a representation of not just that culture, but the way that culture sees the world, the way that culture is reflective of its surroundings, right? The kind of dream image that it constructs itself to make life worth living, right? To make life bearable, okay? To be able to face up to the tragedy. And so he believes that Greek tragedy was a way to answer this call of these two forces in a way that was unprecedented and brought this almost spiritual, religious, you might say, experience to the masses at large, right? To the Greek public at large who would attend these festivals. Okay? So in these Greek festivals, nature seems to reveal a sentimental trait. It is as if she were heaving a sigh at her dismemberment into individuals. The song and pantomime of such dually minded revelers was something new and unheard of for the Homeric Grecian world. And the Dionysian music, in particular, excited awe and terror, right? The Dionysian was something exotic. Euripides, who he does not like too much, we're going to get to Euripides later, Euripides was a tragedian, one of the last the last great tragic poets from ancient Greece. In Euripides' Bacchaia, I don't know if that's how you say it. I've heard people say the Bacchae and other pronunciations. I never took Greek, right? But in the Bacchaia or the Bacchae, the main character is Dionysius, right? And the king Pentheus is very disturbed by the cult of Dionysius, all the Maenads and dancing through the countryside, playing this weird, strange, exotic music. Okay, so there's something dangerous and awe-inspiring and terrible and brutish and foreign about him, right? As xenophobic as that sounds, you got to understand what time the Greeks were living in, right? It was a different world, much different, right? Today's world's pretty sectarian if you look at it, but you got to imagine this is probably even worse. Okay, so I'll just stop there on this video. I think that's a pretty good introduction to these two elements in art, but not just in art. For Nietzsche, these are elements in human nature, in nature in general. These two forces that make themselves known, I guess, through works of art, express themselves through our emotions and through our representations of our dreams and our desires. And for him, again, Greek tragedy blends these two elements in a way that is completely unprecedented. So in the next video, we're going to recap the Apollonian Dionysian in a little bit. We'll talk more about Apollo and the Olympians in general, and talk a bit more about what I mentioned, and I kind of hinted at already, how art is a reflection of a particular way of seeing the world. Right. So when we look at a culture's art, it can sort of reflect their worldview and how they're dealing with certain things, certain problems, certain existential questions. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Hope to see you on the other side. This is the end of video 1. Grazie.